Behold his mighty hand.
Miracles, as commonly understood in the Judeo-Christian tradition, are not a big part of Scientology theology, a modern doctrine which draws not from ancient scripture, but instead from the mind of its founder, the science fiction writer L. Ron Hubbard. This is the critically panned movie version of Hubbard's novel, Battlefield Earth. It starred noted Scientologist John Travolta.
Send some guards out and round them up.
But back in New Jersey, Ron Miscavige says something close to what Christians might call faith healing occurs in 1969. That's when he takes his undersized, asthmatic 9-year-old son, David, for his first session of auditing, a kind of Scientology counseling.
About 45 minutes later, David walks out, smiling, bright. I said, what happened? He says, Dad, it's handled.
So your view at the time was that his asthma was cured by Scientology?
Let's put it this way, it mitigated it considerably. I think it was at that moment that he decided he's going to do something with this.
So you think that was the key turning point in his whole life?
I know it. I know it.
According to Ron, this moment is a sort of conversion experience for the entire family. Now everybody starts studying Scientology, with David setting himself apart as something of a prodigy.
What do you think he was getting out of it?
Satisfaction that he was helping somebody. This is my contributions.
By the year 1975, Ron's music career hits a high note. He even puts out this rather groovy album, while David's Scientology career is really taking off. He's now a young auditor, and he decides to join the church's priestly order, the Sea Organization, or Sea Org. The group's distinctive look, medals, gold ribbons, and dress whites were modeled in part on Hubbard's own time in the U.S. Navy.
He said, I want to go and help L. Ron Hubbard. And I thought to myself, hey, I'd be pretty proud of him. So I said, okay, I'll help you whatever I can.
David heads to Scientology's spiritual headquarters in Clearwater, Florida, which involves signing a billion-year contract, meaning you agree to work for the Sea Org in your future lives. While in Clearwater, he meets LOIS REISDORF, who says she recruits David to join the Commodore's Messenger organization, L. Ron Hubbard's personal elite unit within the Sea Org.
He was very, if I could say, gung-ho, had a lot of spark.
When he was 16, he was a climber. He wanted to be at the top. And he gained a reputation of being really tough, like you didn't mess with him.
Pretty soon, David finds himself in the orbit of the founder, L. Ron Hubbard, who has gone from writing science fiction to writing volumes of sacred Scientology texts. Teenage David moves west without his family, where Hubbard, sometimes known by his initials LRH, is building secret new bases and shooting Scientology training films.
Dave ended up being a cameraman, but in the beginning, we used to call him the Kid, and LRH would call him the Kid.
While Ron Miscavige is back east selling cookware and cutlery, what his son is doing during this period of time is a matter of intense dispute. The church is adamant that Hubbard decided early that David Miscavige would eventually succeed him.
There never ever was any doubt whatsoever that Mr. Hubbard intended Mr. David Miscavige to be the leader of the religion after he had departed this life.
That's not how LOIS REISDORF remembers it. She says Hubbard wanted the church to be run by a committee after he died, not one person. But REISDORF says after Hubbard goes into seclusion in 1980, Miscavige's influence and power grow unchecked as he evolves from the Commodore's messenger into a gatekeeper.
He started to get power and started to pull in people onto his side. And it ended up being like a coup, where you had half of the management took over and kicked out the other half.
REISDORF says she is part of that other half and that she's relieved of her executive duties.
It was a betrayal.
In the book, you say that your son really developed a taste for power in the Sea Org.
There were no checks and balances on him at a certain point where he could just go ahead. He just assumed that power.
The church says neither LOIS REISDORF, who they say was expelled in 1982 by Hubbard personally, nor Ron have first-hand knowledge of these events. Instead, they point out that during this time period, Ron is dealing with his own serious issues. In 1985, Ron is arrested in Pennsylvania and charged with attempted rape, which Ron says is a case of mistaken identity. David arranges for his father's defense.
He said, listen, you're not on your own. They're going to take on the whole Church of Scientology.
The charges are dropped after a pretrial hearing. And after it's all over, Ron says he owes it to the church to join the Sea Org himself.
I could have possibly been convicted of something that I didn't do and end up going to jail. I feel I have to help him.
David told him that his father needed to turn his life around.
Despite the fact that in a 2012 article in the Philadelphia Inquirer, the church called Ron the victim in this case, Scientology officials are now playing a different tune, accusing Ron of deliberately playing down the seriousness of the charges.
The church has gone from calling Ron Miscavige a victim, in the words of the church, to now raising questions about whether he's whitewashing the whole thing. So the only thing that's changed between now and then that I'm aware of is that Ron decided to write a book.
Well, it's not just that he decided to write a book. He decided to tell a false story.
What is not in dispute is that in 1985, Ron moves to California, divorces his wife, and dons the uniform of the Sea Org. And Ron says shortly after coming aboard, he sees that his son has changed.
And I saw him, I said, hey, Dave. And he turned to me and he looked at me like, who are you talking to? No words were said, but that glance told me those days were over. I could never do that as a father to a son.
In 1986, David Miscavige announces a seismic event for the church. L. Ron Hubbard has died.
The being we knew as L. Ron Hubbard still exists. However, the body he had could no longer serve his purposes.
The next year, David officially becomes the head of the church, taking the title Chairman of the Board. He is now alone at the top. From now on, he will be the star of the church's Olympic-sized celebration. He will lead the church through some of its greatest triumphs, like winning its tax-exempt status.
The IRS issued letters recognizing Scientology, and every one of its organizations has fully tax-exempt. The war is over!
And he will spearhead the charge to bring celebrities into the fold.
Were you around when Tom was joining the church, and was it a high priority for your son?
It was top priority.